My sister's husband wants me to completely change my life in my apartment. You won't believe what happened when I said no. I 28F never thought I'd find myself in such an awkward situation with my sister Sarah 30. We've always been close, despite our different approaches to life. While she's always been the more spontaneous one, jumping headfirst into everything, I've preferred my carefully cultivated routines and personal space in my two-bedroom apartment. My apartment has been my sanctuary for the past 3 years. The living room is decorated in soft grays and whites, with carefully chosen minimalist artwork on the walls. I've arranged everything just so, from the perfectly aligned throw pillows on my light gray couch to the meticulously organized bookshelf that doubles as a room divider. The guest room, which I've converted into my personal hobby space, is where I spend most of my evenings working on various projects, from painting to crafting. It's not just a room, it's my escape after long days at the accounting firm where I work. Sarah's whirlwind romance with Mark 31 caught everyone by surprise. They met at a friend's barbecue last summer, and within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding was a rushed affair, small and intimate, they said, but I couldn't help feeling like I barely got to know my new brother-in-law during the whole process. He seemed nice enough at the wedding, though a bit clingy, always hovering around Sarah and rarely engaging with the family independently. The first red flag appeared when Sarah called me 3 weeks after their honeymoon. She was her usual bubbly self, but something felt off about her request to stay with me. "Hey sis," she started, her voice carrying that particular tone she uses when she wants something. "Remember how you said I could stay with you for a few weeks while we figure out our housing situation?" "Yeah, of course," I replied, remembering our conversation at her wedding. They were planning to move closer to the city for better job opportunities, and I had offered my place as a temporary solution while they house hunted. "Well, there's something I need to tell you." She paused, and I could practically hear her fidgeting through the phone. "Mark will be coming with me." I sat down on my couch, already feeling my carefully structured world starting to tilt. "Oh. I thought he was staying back to wrap things up at work?" "That was the original plan, but..." Sarah's voice dropped to that apologetic tone I knew too well. "He doesn't do well being alone for extended periods. He gets anxious, and we've never really been apart since we started dating." That should have been my cue to back out, but Sarah continued before I could formulate a response. She launched into a detailed list of small adjustments they'd need me to make. The more she talked, the more my stomach churned. "We'll need some quiet hours during the day because Mark works remotely," she explained. "Usually from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. He needs complete silence to focus." I glanced around my apartment, thinking about how sound carried between rooms. "Sarah, I live here. I can't just..." "Oh, and about your hobby room," she interrupted. "We were hoping to use that space. Mark needs a proper office setup, and we'd feel more comfortable having our own space to relax." The list continued: no music playing in the apartment during work hours, no friends visiting without advance notice, and they'd need priority access to the kitchen during their preferred meal times. Each request felt like another brick being added to an already towering wall of impositions. "And we might need to rearrange some of your furniture," Sarah added casually. "Mark has this specific ergonomic chair he needs for work, and your current setup doesn't really accommodate our needs as a couple." I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process the audacity of their requests. My apartment, my carefully curated space, was suddenly supposed to transform into their personal hotel with me as the accommodating host. "Sarah," I finally managed, keeping my voice as level as possible, "I don't think this is going to work. When I offered my place, I meant for you to stay here, not for both of you to completely take over my space." "What do you mean?" Her voice took on that hurt tone she's perfected since childhood. "We're family now. Mark is your brother-in-law." "A brother-in-law I've met exactly 3 times, I pointed out. "And this isn't about family. It's about boundaries. I work from home sometimes too, and I need my space. The guest room is where I do my crafting, painting, it's how I decompress after work." "You can do those things in your bedroom," she suggested, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. "Or take a break for a few weeks. It's not that big a deal." I felt my patience wearing thin. "It is a big deal, Sarah. This is my home, not a hotel. I can't just stop living my life because Mark needs specific conditions to work." You're being incredibly selfish right now, she snapped. We're not asking for that much. Just some basic considerations while we get our lives sorted out. Basic considerations. I couldn't help but laugh. You're asking me to completely reorganize my life and living space for people I barely know. Yes, Sarah, I barely know Mark. Having met him at your wedding and 2 family dinners doesn't make us close. The conversation devolved from there. Sarah accused me of not supporting her marriage, of being jealous because I was single, and of failing to understand how relationships work. Each accusation was more ridiculous than the last, but what really got to me was her final statement. Fine, she said, her voice cold. If you're going to be like this, we just won't visit at all. I thought I could count on my sister, but I guess I was wrong. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me sitting in my quiet, organized apartment feeling like the worst sister in the world. The guilt lasted about 10 minutes before my phone started buzzing with messages from various family members. Apparently, Sarah had immediately called our mother, who then called our aunt, who then posted something vague but clearly disapproving on Facebook. Within hours, I had messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, all expressing their disappointment in my lack of family values. The next day, I received a long email from Mark himself. It was the most I'd ever heard from him, and honestly, it didn't improve my opinion. He wrote about how Sarah was deeply wounded by my rejection of their marriage and how, as the older sister, I should be more understanding of their needs as a newly married couple. A marriage is like a delicate flower, he wrote, in what I assume he thought was a poetic metaphor. It needs the right environment to flourish. By denying us the space we need to grow together, you're essentially telling Sarah that her happiness doesn't matter to you. I had to read that part twice to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. They weren't asking for space to grow together, they were asking me to shrink myself in my own home to accommodate their apparently codependent relationship. The situation escalated when Sarah started posting passive-aggressive updates on social media about toxic family members and the importance of supporting new marriages. Some of our mutual friends started taking sides, sending me messages either supporting my decision to maintain boundaries or questioning why I couldn't just help out family. 3 days after the initial phone call, our mother decided to intervene. She called me while I was at work, her voice carrying that mixture of disappointment and attempted understanding that only mothers can achieve. Honey, she started, I know you like your space, but Sarah and Mark are just starting their life together. They need support right now. I pinched the bridge of my nose, already feeling a headache coming on. Mom, they're asking me to completely upend my life. Mark wants me to not play music, not have friends over, and give up my hobby room. In my own apartment. Well, it's just for a few weeks, she reasoned. And Mark does have anxiety issues. Sarah told me he's been really stressed about the move. Then maybe they should look into getting their own place first, or stay at a hotel, I suggested. I'm not running a couples retreat. Mom sighed heavily. You know they're trying to save money for a down payment. Hotels are expensive in the city. So is my peace of mind, I countered. The conversation went around in circles, with Mom trying to guilt me into changing my mind and me standing my ground. It ended with her telling me to think about it and promising to talk to Sarah about compromising. Sarah's version of compromising, as it turned out, was offering to reduce their stay to 3 weeks instead of 4, while keeping all their other requirements. She texted me this generous offer along with a reminder that family should come first. I didn't respond immediately, which prompted another series of messages about how I was ghosting her and proving her right about my selfishness. It was exhausting, but I held firm. The situation came to a head when Sarah and Mark showed up unannounced at my apartment the following weekend. I was in my hobby room, working on a new painting project, when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found them standing there with overnight bags. We thought if we could show you how considerate we'll be as house guests, you'd change your mind, Sarah announced, trying to step past me into the apartment. I blocked the doorway, feeling a mix of disbelief and anger. You can't just show up like this. See? Mark turned to Sarah, his voice carrying a note of vindication. I told you she wouldn't be reasonable. Reasonable? I couldn't help but laugh. You're the ones showing up unannounced, trying to force your way into my home after I've already said no. We're family. Sarah protested, her voice rising. You can't just leave us standing in the hallway. Actually, I can, I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. And I will. This is exactly why I said no in the first place. You don't respect boundaries. Mark stepped forward, adopting what I assume he thought was a diplomatic tone. Look, we're all adults here. Let's sit down and discuss this properly. I'm sure once you understand our perspective. I understand your perspective perfectly, I cut him off. You want me to turn my home into your personal bubble where everything revolves around your needs. That's not happening. Not for 3 weeks, not for 3 days, not at all. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears, her go-to move when things aren't going her way. I can't believe you're being so cruel. We're married now, we need to stay together. Then stay together in your own place, I suggested. There are plenty of short-term rentals available. I'll even help you look for one. Those are expensive. Sarah protested. So is my mental health, I responded, echoing what I'd told our mother. Which is exactly what I'd be sacrificing if I let you two take over my space. The confrontation ended with Sarah dramatically declaring that she didn't recognize me anymore and Mark making some comment about toxic individualism. They left in a huff, but not before Sarah announced that she would never forget this betrayal. The aftermath was predictably dramatic. Sarah posted a lengthy Facebook status about family betrayal and the death of sisterly love, which garnered plenty of sympathetic comments from relatives and friends who only heard her side of the story. Some family members took it upon themselves to try and mediate, sending me messages about the importance of family and how we all need to make sacrifices sometimes. But here's the thing, I don't regret my decision. Yes, it's created family drama. Yes, some relatives are giving me the cold shoulder. And yes, Sarah is still not speaking to me except through passive-aggressive social media posts. But my home remains my sanctuary, my hobby room is still my space to unwind, and I can play music whenever I want. A week after the confrontation, I received a group email from Sarah and Mark announcing they'd found a short-term rental apartment closer to their target neighborhood. The email included a pointed note about how they managed to figure things out without family support, but I considered that a win. Our mother still brings it up occasionally, usually with a heavy sigh and I wish you girls could work things out. Sarah has taken to introducing me at family gatherings as her sister who values her space more than family, which, honestly, isn't entirely inaccurate. Mark, for his part, now uses me as an example in his social media posts about modern family dynamics and the breakdown of traditional values. He recently wrote a blog post about toxic individualism in family relationships that I'm pretty sure was inspired by our interaction, though he changed enough details to maintain plausible deniability. The whole experience has been a lesson in standing firm on boundaries, even when it means facing family disapproval. Sarah and Mark eventually found their perfect house in the city, without ever having to compromise my living space or their apparently inseparable bond. They've settled into their new home, where they can have all the quiet hours and couple space they want. As for me, I'm still in my carefully organized apartment, enjoying my hobby room and playing music whenever I please. Sarah and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship, though family gatherings are still a bit tense. She recently admitted, after a few glasses of wine at our cousin's wedding, that maybe they had been a little unreasonable with their requests, though she quickly followed that with "but you could have been more understanding." I've noticed that some of our mutual friends who initially sided with Sarah have started to come around, especially after hearing similar stories about her and Mark's expectations of others. Apparently, they've also tried to impose their couple needs on other friends and family members, with varying degrees of success. Looking back, I realized that this situation was probably inevitable. Sarah has always had a tendency to expect others to accommodate her, and Mark seems to encourage that aspect of her personality. Their marriage has created a sort of echo chamber where their expectations of others seem reasonable to them, even when they're clearly not. The irony is that by maintaining my boundaries, I might have actually helped them grow as a couple. They had to figure out their housing situation independently, rather than relying on family to accommodate their unreasonable demands. Sometimes, saying no is the kindest thing you can do, even if it doesn't feel that way at the time. My hobby room remains my favorite space in the apartment, and every time I'm in there, working on a project or just unwinding after work, I'm reminded that standing up for your personal space isn't selfish, it's necessary. Even if it means being the subject of a few passive-aggressive social media posts and family gossip along the way.